We live?
I think we're live.
Woo!
All right. Let's make sure we're live. Yes. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 47 of Exploring Genuine Transformation.
I'm trying to share our thing. I'm
What'd you
sorry.
say?
I'm trying to share our thing. Oh, here we go. Yes. All right.
Cool.
I'm here. The tech is sorted.
Yes. So yeah, for everybody who doesn't know me, who's in Freya's audience, my name is Lori Beth, and I'm a psychotherapist and a psychospiritual mentor. And I work with women to resolve lifelong trauma so they can stop being self-development projects and start living as they are now. So yay. So Freya and I actually have a lot of overlaps, and I will introduce her. And this show just basically is about exploring what genuine transformation is, and the way that the people that I have come on the show, we're really looking at more of an inner transformation, more of having more of who you are, more intimacy with self, more intimacy with life, more freedom. And so today's topic is like very much at the heart of that. And it's also a topic that's also really at the heart of my work. So I'm excited for us to dive in together. And the topic is lineage breakers. And we're going to be exploring, early developmental trauma and also ancestral trauma, and what it means to be the one in your lineage to say, this stops with me. And also what happens when people choose not to do that, and what the consequences are for their life, or what the impacts are in their life. So before we dive in, I want to introduce Freya. She is a trauma-informed coach who works with women specifically, right? I think you're working with
women. I do work with some men, but mostly I work with women. Yeah.
And in order to, you're working with women to, I think you do a lot of different things as I've tracked you online over this last year. But, working with women specifically to support them to move through trauma and find empowerment and, connect to their sexuality more, their sensuality, pleasure. And I'm just guessing like any kind of enjoyment of life, basically, kind of reclaiming yourself after that. And I appreciate so much that you're a trauma-informed coach. And I also want to add that Freya has been studying very intensely to become she's been studying psychology, but also to become a psychotherapist, which I think is also very relevant, to have the depth of training to be able to really serve people, even though I already feel like you have it from what I have witnessed in you.
You can never stop learning.
Yeah.
And there's just so much to learn, it's such a broad field, and there are new discoveries every single day, and and also you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I feel that as well. Even after 13 years of being a psychotherapist, it's like I'm continually learning and growing. And then obviously, and we'll talk about this in the interview, that obviously, through our own personal journeys, we're always learning and growing. And but one thing I want to just say, one of the things, I can't remember like when I actually first saw you online, but I really appreciated it, and I've continued.
It wasn't Stacy.
No, it wasn't Stacy. No, it was before that.
Stacy's my spiritual alter ego, for everyone who doesn't know.
Tune into Freya's page to learn about Stacy. We could do a follow-up interview of Stacy.
Babes. Stace would love that, Giles. It'd be great. In fact, I can intuit that that's already going to happen.
Yes. um, yeah, but one of the things that I've just appreciated about you so much over the time that I first found you is that I just think you have a very grounded and I want to say practical approach, but I appreciate your boldness, like how much you're willing to speak up about the things that you see and about trauma in general. And both, you know, I have an interest and have been doing a series of talks actually on, is the coaching industry giving you PTSD? And I just appreciate, I think you're a forerunner in that. Like I kind of entered the industry and was like, whoa, this is happening here without like, not, you know, it sort of just hit me.
Yeah.
But I've really appreciated how much you've spoken to that, and also spoken to the need for, you know, if you are really working with early developmental trauma or ancestral trauma, like how you can get the right kind of help. And you know, a lot of the loopholes, a lot of the things that happen in this industry that don't actually allow people to get the right kind of help and actually can be harmful, can create even more harm.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I remember. I mean, I've always, you know, appreciated. And what I love about your approach is that every time I hear you speak or you write, I feel like you really get to the heart of the matter. Like you're able to describe things in such a clear way that really gets that people can really understand, while also speaking about your own personal experience and being willing to be vulnerable and authentic. But you do that in such a beautiful way that weaves together. Yeah.
Yeah. That's nice to get that, to hear how it's being received.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to be interviewing you and having this conversation and to dive into this topic.
Yeah. I'm excited to be here, you know, and just, I think I love conversation with people. And I think that's also part of why I post a lot, is because it's not just that I have something that I want to say, it's that I like to engage with other people. And it's exciting to me to have conversations with people who are deeply steeped as practitioners and who are doing the work for themselves, which are things that I recognize in you. So I'm excited to be here and just so happy to have a conversation like this anyway, because this is what I love talking about, but also considering the fact that I'm locked in Melbourne, you know, in lockdown. And like, this is the most exciting Friday night I've had in so long, dude. I swear to God. It's like party in my bedroom. You know? I should have put lipstick on, I swear. Sorry, my eyes are watering. I don't know why. I think it's because it's spring. They just keep watering. But anyway.
I love that. Yeah. So, you know, we'll dive into the topic, and it's obviously a very serious topic, but we're also going to try to bring some levity, if we can, to this. It's your Friday night, my Friday morning.
Yeah. So it's Friday. It's Venus's day.
Right. Exactly. It's Friday.
Yeah.
So, well, and I want to say that I knew that when we decided to do this, that I wanted to, we of course would talk about trauma, but I'll just introduce the topic a little bit more by saying that Freya wrote a post that was called Lineage Breakers. And I was really moved by the post and what she, you know, and maybe you can share a little bit about that post, but she shared her own personal story of, you know, having lived through childhood trauma, and then how, you know, like really inherent in the post was, you know, okay, what happens when you choose to face it, and what are some of the, you know, and in your life that there are some, you know, it created a rift in your family, also created healing at the same time. So there's some hard choices that sometimes people have to make in order to reclaim their freedom, in order to actually have to heal that trauma. And then you also spoke to, you know, other people in your lineage who were not dealing with their trauma or were ignoring it, and then the impacts of that. And so that's really how I want to frame this, conversation is we can talk about trauma, but one that sometimes I think your story is just so important because sometimes we do have to make the really, really hard decisions.
Yeah.
And it isn't easy, but it also will lead to such a sense of freedom and being able to live now. Because I think what we're always, what I'm always trying to do with my clients, and I'm sure you are too, is okay, this was the past. How do we work with the past enough to be able to actually live in the present and be adults and enjoy our lives now? I mean, that's, there's obviously facing trauma, but then it's like,
it's for a reason.
Yeah.
It's not just to like roll around. There's a reason why we do it. And I think that really, the reason I do not believe that our trauma, our path of healing our trauma is separate from the spiritual path. And I think that some traditions or attitudes may be because of the context and the time in which they evolved from, and that they didn't have any better language, they didn't have any better coping skills. Often pushing down the very human parts is like the way to experience God, and, there's no distinction in my mind between East and West in that, I think all faces of the globe, we've seen, the pushing down of the human in order to be holy, or in order to experience good things. But I think that really if you want to look at trauma from a spiritual perspective, and this is not to bypass it at all, because in order to have this experience, you have to go through the stages of grieving and healing, right? But for me, in my personal journey and my attitude towards this, the path of trauma, though it's approached because it's approached from such a human place that does not exclude the humanity in any way whatsoever, as many disassociative practices do, and they have their own places. The path of healing trauma is deeply about self-love, and it's deeply about compassion. I think the more that I used to prioritize very heavily, and everyone who knows me knows this about me, it's like truth is the way, very much with this energy, truth. And thank God I have that in me, because I might not be alive if I didn't have that kind of warrior feist inside of me. But the more that I confront and face and love and hold and integrate and validate the painful places in myself, the more that I develop compassion for myself, and that gives me greater compassion for the world. And an ability a burgeoning ability, an attempt of an ability maybe to hold the complexity of the light and dark that is humanity, and in both hands, rather than needing it to be just good or just bad, to be able to hold both, and as confusing as that is, and to have compassion for it. So I think that for me anyway, there are many benefits to healing trauma, or to being with it. Personal freedom, less disassociation, so better ability to think more clearly, healthier boundaries, more empowerment, a nervous system that can hold energy in a stable way, which impacts on our finances, it impacts on our emotional regulation, it impacts on our relationships. But of all of those things, I really think that compassion and love are the main benefits for trauma healing. And I think that when it's ancestral, it's like next level. you know,
What do you,
because
yeah, say more about that.
well, I guess and I imagine people who experience racism must feel similarly about this, you know, because to heal, to be working on that kind of trauma, you're dealing with the system, right? And so when you're working with ancestral trauma,
Uh-huh.
you're working with the system that you grew up in. But it's also like those were the people from a very early age who were mirroring back to you directly if you were worthy or not. You know, so that's a big choice. To some people, you know, you could break away from it. Some people, it's mostly, it seems to be like in both the literature and in, you know, my own anecdotal experience of talking to people about this, it seems to be mostly common that people who go through very severe trauma within their families usually have to break away, and usually those families don't support people. And unfortunately, it's more common for family systems to collude in abuse than it is for them to actually choose to heal, because like you said, healing is often challenging. But you know, I also have optimism. I'm sure there are experiences of families choosing to heal together as well, you know. So to choose to, if that is the case where you step away from the family and choose to heal that on your own, you're not doing it for the weight of the family, you know. That's then stepping into the rescuer archetype, right? But it's like that's a lot of validating oneself in the face of a lot of invalidation, I think. So that's my rant on that topic. Or part of it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just considering what you're sharing. Yeah, there's something, I mean, I'm just thinking about, you know, being like specifically with the lineage. I mean, you said a lot in there. You were both bringing in the spiritual first, you know, that you really have seen it sort of coincide with the spiritual path for you, and that can be true for other people. I mean, one thought that I had when you were speaking about that, which you didn't say explicitly, is that, you know, a lot of these traditions, spiritual traditions, like you said, are kind of disembodied. They're going up and out. And I think that like working with trauma, in my view, right? Like, even though it's so hard, if you can, it begins to embody you again, right? It do you, and partly why you're able to experience compassion or love is because you can feel, okay, this is like, I can put myself in another person's shoes. I can feel this. I can feel my body. I can feel the earth. I can feel, so it feels like it kind of brings everything down. And then we're more present, we're more available, we're more like available to life, you know. We're more I don't know, I'm thinking about that because there are so many benefits to healing trauma, and I think you named so many of them really beautifully. You know, and I think a big one is like, I get to be here now in this life, in this body.
As me.
Yeah, as me. Yeah, which is also something that's interesting. Like it, and all of the benefits of healing trauma, in my view as well. And this is the work that I do, and I call it. I would say, like, I talk about work being sovereign, which isn't like you do it a certain way. It's that you do it your way. You find out who you are, right? You find
100%.
out how you want to live.
Yes.
But that was just interesting for me to, you know, it's interesting to think about that coinciding with, it sounds like for you, it's been a deeply spiritual experience to, you know, heal trauma as much as it's kind of a practical experience. I don't know if you can speak a little bit more to that.
To which bit, the practical or the spiritual or the combination of
Yeah, the
both?
combination or what it's been like for you.
Just gonna grab some water. Jesus. What has it been like? It's been fucking brutal, man. It's been so brutal. Yeah.
I don't
I'm
know
so
if in there you want to speak to your story that I was referencing, if that feels relevant.
I can't remember. Have I said anything? Because I know we were speaking before we started recording. So did I say anything already about my journey on the live? Okay. Okay. I guess I grew up in a very abusive home. My dad was a violent alcoholic, although he still to this day denies everything apart from the alcoholism, but that's what liars do. They lie. And anyway, so I grew up in a very violent household and had a lot of mental health issues for a really long time. Like I had insomnia for a really long time and eating disorders, which really peaked in my mid-20s, and depression and, panic attacks and all kinds of things. And I was aware of some sexual abuse in my history from a family friend, but it wasn't until how old was I? It was only a few years ago. It was like, I think when I was 31 it was when I was 31 that I started having flashbacks of being abused by my dad. And that the years since then have, basically been me going through the journey of extreme PTSD and flashbacks and night terrors and, what happens to the nervous system when that level of terror and powerlessness is coming out of you to be healed. And through that process of confronting that core trauma, well, I hope it's my core trauma, because I tell you, if there's more in there that I'm not aware of, I'm just going to be like, dude, I want a fucking refund. Like, seriously, like, come on, but like through this process, it's so nice that I can laugh now, about it. And I think that that's such a mark of healing, is when you get your joy and your playfulness back. But yeah, so through that process of healing that and coming to terms with that, I recognized a lot of the toxicity that I was not aware was in my life, which was built upon the foundation of that original trauma, and I've always been a deeply spiritual person. Like from the age of 9, when I was like trying to astral project like out of my bed, like, and I'd be there and I'd be praying to God. I'm like, dear God, please make me a witch. Please make me a witch. And I must have prayed so well, because like, here we go, I'm here, so like, so I've always been like really spiritual. But I guess the combination of being very spiritual, being very high in trait openness, and having some really deep trauma led me to being like very deluded in a lot of ways, very, very delusional, and engaging in spiritual communities that were cults, and it was when I realized that I had been a part of a community like that, at this time when all of this trauma was coming up, it was such a punch to my gut. It was just like, oh my God, I thought that I was an intelligent woman. I cannot believe that I've gotten involved in a structure like this. It's like, am I stupid? Like, all the things that people say to themselves when they recognize that they've duped themselves, and I had to go through a massive process of like, can I trust myself? What can I believe? Can I believe anything? And that whole kind of the lack of health in power structures that showed up in my choice to be involved in a structure like that, I witnessed how it played out in other areas and how it came originally from that original trauma in the family system that I grew up in, you know, and how that played out in my choice of partners, in the way that, you know, the type of relationship that happens when you've had that kind of background, the kinds of not trustworthy friendships that I had, having lots of selfish people in my life who I was constantly giving to, and really playing out the role of rescuer a lot, everywhere. It's like people talk a lot about the victim and the perpetrator in the drama triangle. And I have both of those in me for sure. But like the one that really has run amok for me has been the rescuer, constantly trying to save the family from bad daddy, trying to save bad daddy from himself, and not just any one bad daddy. It's like bad daddies everywhere, and not saving myself. And so when I came out to my family, they all ostracized me. They didn't believe me. They told me I was narcissistic. I'm currently connected to 4 of my family members who are on my mother's side who are not immediate family members. And I'm really grateful for them, my aunt and uncle and my 2 cousins. I'm really grateful for them. It means a lot to me that, they care. It's like, it's pretty intense. It's a very intense experience. It's one thing, people who they have not good relationships with their family, but they're in contact with their family and they feel alone. But to literally have that severed and to be completely, or whether you sever it or they sever it, and it's like there's a wall there and I can no longer connect. It's very, my experience is very primal. It's a very primal activation. It's like the only way I can describe it, whether it's scientifically correct or not.
Yeah.
It just feels like amygdala activation. It's just like there is nowhere safe in the world, And so that journey to go through that level of ongoing betrayal that just kept compiling, like it just didn't stop. Over the course of healing this, and I'm not done healing it, but I'm definitely out of the woods of the worst part. But to keep seeing such ugliness in humanity, in the face of humanity, and just constant betrayal from every single facet, from every person, almost every person I thought that I could trust, and to keep being betrayed in that way was a trauma on top of the trauma that had caused me to be attracted to those people, and that's something that I'm still processing. But the thing is that I'm so thankful for the fire in my soul. I do not know where it comes from, but I'm grateful that it's there. Whenever my soul was like up there being like, okay, I'm going to incarnate and it's going to be fucking shit, so I better make sure I'm an Aries with lots of Sagittarius placements. It's like, I can look at it in that lens, or however I want to look at it, whether it's my genetics or whatever. Maybe the strength in the perpetrator of my father actually gave strength to my healthy power. I don't know what it is, but the fire in my soul will not let other things defeat me, and so for me, that journey, and I know, like, I still have bitterness and resentment and rage and anger in me about everything that's happened, but I know that if I allow those things to win, I'm going to end up a very bitter, alone and angry woman, and I don't want that. So the choice that I make every day, even though sometimes I'm just fucking furious and I'm like, humans are cunts. Like, oh, I'm sorry, you guys have an American audience. Americans are a lot less liberal than like Australians are. And sorry, humans are not great a lot of the time. Okay. So it's like, I still have a lot of anger that I'm processing, but I know that there is something that I can get from this. And I know that a lot of people, that sometimes that term, there is a lesson in this, can be used as a way to gaslight people who've been through some kind of trauma. And so I don't think that things happen for a reason. I don't think that. I don't think things happen because some benevolent fucking God was like, oh, I'm just going to give you a shit sandwich and, you know, you're going to benefit from it. I don't think that's what happens. I think that life is neither fair nor unfair. I think it just is, and it's really fucking brutal. However, we can make meaning from our experiences if we choose to. And because I want to not just survive but thrive, I choose as best as I can to constantly come back and face my pain and to dialogue with it and see what it needs and see how I can be with it and hold it in such a way that it can feel safe again and it can feel love again. And so that I can look at the beauty of the world and be in love with life, because I only have one life. And so I don't want to be miserable for the rest of it. And that doesn't mean denying my emotions at all, but it means being willing to face the pain. And to me, that is a deeply spiritual experience, you know, that ability, because do you want to say something?
I was just going to say, it also reminds me of Viktor Frankl's, I think it's Man's Search for Meaning. And, you know, I don't know if you know that book, but he speaks about
I haven't read
kind
it.
of, he was in the Holocaust, and he speaks about sort of like how people, it's like his way of working with people, but it's how people could find meaning within that, you know, terrible circumstance. And yeah, it's, anyway, that's just what it made me think of. If you have more to say, yeah, keep going.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, well, meaning I don't think is inherent to reality, but meaning is important, because how we create meaning determines the life that we create for ourselves, I believe.
Yeah, I
So,
think, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. Yeah, and so I was just going to say that you know, when I was to kind of like backtrack to come forward, my whole life I've been very, very open to like God, if you want to call it. I don't, you know, when I say that, I mean like the consciousness that's inherent within everything, you know, that energy that awakens that, being super open to it, you know. And I think that's a result of like a natural tendency, and also the fact that my nervous system was totally shattered open. And so I could feel things, you know. And when I went through the worst of, because, you know, I had mental health stuff for years, but this was kind of like the crux and the origin point. And when that surfaced, it's like all of my capacity to feel connected to life closed. And I couldn't see and feel the magic in life. And I couldn't feel connected to the trees when I would go out walking. And I couldn't see that kind of sparkling magic that floats in the air, or a sense of expansion and connected to all things. I couldn't feel any of that because my system was totally shut down. And it gave me such a deep sense of compassion for people who are really shut down and don't even know it, and they don't have any reference point for what it feels like to be open. It's like, fuck, that's why people think people who are open are crazy, you know, because it's like they have no reference point. And the journey of continuing to face that trauma and that hardship and have forgiveness for myself and for the things that humans do to each other helps me to reopen again to that magic and to feel connected both to myself and to that which is beyond this one individual person, you know. And that to me that to me, you know, I really understood this. There was like this one point when I was kind of out of the worst bit of it. And I was like, that's actually the most important thing in life, because that tiny little viewpoint and ability to connect to everything is what makes it's the most valuable thing that you cannot buy with money. And it's what makes everything magical, and it's real as far as I'm concerned. So that's kind of how I see some of the practical, that's like some of my journey, and that's how I see some of the practical aspects of healing trauma and the spiritual aspects, to answer those different questions in that way.
Yeah, I really I feel moved by, you know, you continuing to kind of bring in the spiritual component, and, you know, what you just spoke to, that because there's, right, like there, like we said before, there's so many different benefits of healing trauma, right? Like even, you know, you didn't say this exactly, but I really believe your story says this, like that a lot of the symptoms that you were having earlier were like symptoms. It's like a lot of mental health symptoms are often because we're not actually touching the core of what we need to be feeling, right? Like anxiety, depression, all those things are surface emotions, or insomnia, and there's something beneath that. And I also believe that we can't force ourselves to get there. Like it's something that, you know, we can be curious about the symptom. This is here, what, you know, and in the work that I do with people, like I'm working through the body. So often when there's some kind of, you know, numbness or depression or frozenness or something, it's like we go right there. And then usually when we can just be present with it, which goes back to just kind of the basics even of mindfulness, or of just presence with experience, then, you know, something has space to move. Or even when people say, well, I don't want to feel this, then I'm like, okay, well, what's it like to not want to feel this? Let's go there, right? Like there's something in you, there's some wisdom in the nervous system and the body. So I was thinking that based on your story. Sorry, do you have any, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say there's wisdom to it, and there's also wisdom to when the system reveals itself, right?
Yeah.
Because like if we push too hard, and like I've done this to myself, and I know, and I think maybe it's a rite of passage, I don't know, but like I used to think it made me really like hardcore. I was like, I'm hardcore, and now I'm like, no, you're just a bit of a
I have the same thing, but it's because I have a similar personality to you, I think. But there's always been like this, for me, actually, I had to learn to slow down and not keep trying to kind of like my mode was trying really hard to kind of, what's this about and what's going on, and let me feel it, and you know, and it's interesting, right? Like it's
let me dig it up.
Like, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and what I keep finding is that the wisdom of the body is actually and that we can't, you know, when we talk about a spiritual journey too with trauma, I think that this struck me about your story as well, right? That you can't, and this has been my own personal experience and my experience with clients, we can't know what we don't know before we do. And I don't believe that it's because, oh, now it's time or now it's not time. It's more just like, you know, you were living in a certain way, right? And then there were things that you were unconsciously repeating, right? You could say like being in a cult, there were things that your trauma were then leading you to do that you maybe were not aware of, right? And then when it all happened, when it all revealed itself and you started to have flashbacks, it all revealed itself, and it was like, oh, like this is all here. So I mean, and I don't say that in like I don't believe that I'm similar to you. I don't believe that there's like, this was meant to happen or not meant to happen, but just that there is a wisdom to our body, nervous systems.
100%. I mean, I really, like, I started doing yoga when I was 14, and like started doing like, you know, Reiki and energy work and all of that when I was 18. And then by 20, like, and I was doing meditation practice, but by 24, I had a daily solid meditation practice, you know, and I was, you know, additionally like doing very deep yoga, very deep spiritual work, doing therapy, doing personal development work. And it was like 10 years. It was more than 10 years. It was like since I was 18, but like 10 years, because I'm 34 now, but 10 years from 24 of like dedicated, well, 10 years now. Anyway, from the age of 24, it was like a number of years of like seriously dedicated practice before my system felt safe enough that I could handle what it needed to show me, that it could reveal that to me, you know? And so, you know, I think it's like the mind knows. And I think that if we try and force ourselves, like you're saying, to like push into the nervous system, or it's like let the mind just reveal itself like a flower. It's like, look, you know, when you said that of like when it revealed itself, you're talking about my trauma revealing itself. I had this image of like a dancing girl revealing itself. It's like, oh, hey, I'm here.
I love that you can laugh about this.
Dude, you've got to laugh. I mean, I can laugh now, you know. It used to just, it was, you know, it's been brutal for a long time, but
Well,
let
and
it reveal like a flower is what I'm trying to say, you know.
yeah. Well, and then I keep just thinking, I just still feel touched by this image, you know, by you speaking about the spiritual aspect for yourself of the magic, you know, of being able to find that magic. Because I think that, I mean, not only, interestingly, right, like trauma theory itself, like if we look at actually the mechanics of it, of a lot of different modalities, it's like when the nervous system is too overactivated, it will not heal. So when people have trauma, they tend to want to go, like if I get really activated or if I'm really upset about something, I tend to want to go more into the upset, right? But I'm actually just in a trauma vortex, like in a loop.
Yeah.
And so actually often this is what's interesting about what you said, often what actually heals the trauma or begins to reorganize it is to find pleasure, is to find something that feels good, is to find that spark of magic within that. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it I often think about it, I often have talked about it more like I just did. But I think that what you shared about, it just strikes me as something that's so important in the healing of trauma. And when we're also dealing with such heavy things, is, I mean, of course, it's like, you know, of course, heavy things are heavy things. And I'm sure that when you were in you know,
I wasn't laughing about it at that point.
yeah, you weren't laughing about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is something to be said for, like, I mean, if we take it back to even the meaning thing, how do we create some kind of space within this experience? You know, and that could be, that can be very little things like, you know, I mean, like, for example, wow, I'm not able to notice the trees. Okay, well, can I notice it for even like a moment? You know, can I
100%.
take this in at all? And I often do that even when I'm working with people. It's like, okay, they can't take in the contact that they need, right? Because there's some trauma maybe that's activated, because when we're talking also about early relational trauma, often people have been like, the people that were supposed to be the safest to you are actually the most dangerous, right? And so your body doesn't learn. I mean, there's many impacts of that, and you've spoken to a lot of them as I've tracked you online, but the body doesn't learn, you know, what is safe and what isn't. So often we move towards things that are dangerous, and or we can't actually take in real contact. But it just strikes me, there's something that's so, I mean, I'm curious in your own story, if you want to speak to it, but like how you made it through in this regard. But I think there's just something that's so important about what you're speaking to around sort of any way that within these kind of horrific experiences, that there can be some kind of space or some kind of, you know, appreciation or some kind of, you know, sort of spiritual core. You know, for you, it might be like that fire of like, wait, I know that life has more than this. Like I've experienced it before. And I don't know if you experienced that. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Honestly, like in the midst of it, I didn't know if I'd make it out alive. And I didn't know if there would be more for me in life. I didn't know. Like it was bleak and dark.
Yeah.
And it was very, very dark. So it wasn't necessarily an innate fire. In those moments, that was when I was like shut down from being able to experience the beauty. And so
Mhm.
it's more, I think, maybe what kept me going is that I just have a habit of determination that
Yeah.
kept me going. But the things to come back to what, even though it wasn't that I wasn't naturally able to see the beauty, and I think beauty is really important.
Mhm.
Actually, it's like, you know, Peter Levine talking about resourcing the nervous system and titrating in and out, and you know, we can do that in life, and just you know, we can't just be in the pain all the time because it's too much. It's like
Yeah, which is
it's
what yeah.
too, yeah,
Mhm.
it is, and it's like it's too much. So you know, I did a lot. Like I did everything that I could. um, I was working out a lot, which really helped. Like I could literally feel my heart rate would get to a certain rate, and it would trigger terror. And I was like, oh, this is what my heart would do as a little child. I would feel terror, and now that I'm getting my heart rate up to this point, it's like releasing terror from my heart. I was like,
Mhm.
wow, okay, I guess this is kind of scary, but I should keep doing this. You know, and they've
Mhm.
done a lot of studies that um, um, uh, what's the word, like weights resistance training can really
Yeah.
help with PTSD. So it's like I would religiously do my meditation practice, religiously work out. I was very fit. I'm not that fit right now, you know, but like it really helped my nervous system, spending a lot of time in nature, lots of magnesium baths.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say to people who are going through this themselves, I didn't have I didn't have any family really who I could talk to and be a support. Um, I had very, very few friends who I could turn to. Most of them, the only real ones who I spoke to were overseas. So I didn't really have anyone close in proximity. But for people, and that made it really hard. But for people who do have friends, it's like obviously like working one on one with someone, you cannot do it on your own. So I, you know, have therapists. Um, but friends are super important. You know, friends as a support system, you know, just having someone there who can validate your experience and just tell you that they love you, you know, is really important. Those and just like if you're able to be touched, like
Yeah.
hugs. You know, some people might, it might be like absolutely do not touch me, you know, and then that's important to not have touch. But one of the things that was really important, and I think speaks specifically, you know, so there are lots of periphery practices. I was doing TRE every day. You know, it's like to speak specifically to what you were saying about the magic. You know how the heart math crew, they say that I don't know that they're the only ones, but I learnt it from them, and I think that they were the ones who did the studies on it, that the heart actually, the heartbeat, not just the heartbeat, the heart itself regulates the amygdala and switches on the parasympathetic nervous system. And so, you know, and then Joe Dispenza talks about it, he got it from them, you know, and then when the amygdala like calms down, then you can actually use the prefrontal cortex and think clearly, you know, which when you're in a sympathetic nervous system response, which you are when you're in PTSD, you can't think clearly. Like I couldn't read a book for 2 years because I couldn't focus, you know. So I became aware of this, and I was like, I became aware of this at the same point that I became aware that I hadn't smiled for nearly a year.
Mhm.
And I'm a naturally very joyful, playful person. So
Mhm.
for me to realize that, I was just like, I have to do something because if I'm not dying, I'm already dead inside, you know? So I started doing regular practices, meditation practices, sometimes doing Joe Dispenza practices, which he's not at all trauma informed. So I'd like want to preface that and say that. But like I was aware of being trauma informed, you know, so I felt like I could confidently work with these practices. But doing regular practices like bliss state practices, you
Mhm.
know, and taking time and effort to feel love, to feel gratitude for the tiniest things that I could feel gratitude for. I have a roof over my head, I have food on my plate. Like There's no one hurting me right now. There's sun on my skin. Like, these are things I'm grateful for. Like, being able to feel, to take myself out of my house and go into nature and force myself to look at a flower and be like, okay, see the beauty in this flower, you know. But particularly, like, every single morning I would do my Vipassana practice and like feel what was there in my body, which wasn't fun, you know, at that point. But then afterwards, I would always do some sort of love or bliss practice. And often it would involve listening to like Hans Zimmer or like some sort of incredibly blissful music, and just sitting and putting attention on the center of my chest and letting myself. There's this particular practice that I offer quite a lot in different courses that I run. And the place that I first learned it from was a classical tantra teacher, and it's a practice of spanda, which is the inherent vibration that is within all things. And in classical tantra, energy is associated with Shakti, which is I don't want to say the feminine, because that could, I don't know, people might disagree with me, but anyway, it's the energetic component of reality and is often associated with love, whereas consciousness is associated with truth. And then it's arbitrary terms, really, they're just the same thing. But doing this practice of remembering all the moments where I had felt the most love, joy, connection, belonging, and inspiration, and just bringing those moments to mind. And then, like, it's like I'm seeing the moment, I'm feeling it through my body, I'm placing that in my heart. Next moment, seeing it, feeling it, placing it in my heart, and like allowing it to expand and expand and expand, and reminding this muscle, my heart, like, you can love, you can feel good feelings, you know. And as I would do that, it would also, you know, calm my amygdala, calm the nervous system, and it would create a bit more spaciousness. I had very little space in my system, but it would create some space in my system. And the more that I practiced that, and the more that I continued to go into the sludge and the hell that I was in and just keep digging away, not digging like we're talking before, but, you know, slopping the bucket out, you know, the more that I started to be able to have spontaneous moments of wonder.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think it's so important, and you're speaking to something that's extremely important for people who are in the midst of, you know, dealing with a really long-standing trauma, or just experiencing, you know, like we talked about before, experiencing massive depression, or this kind of like black wall, you know, the feeling like there is nothing, which usually there's feelings underneath, but of course the process, right, to work with any trauma. But I think what's so important about what you're speaking to is, and it's beautiful that you had the determination to do it, you know, is finding, even if you can't, like, even if you don't want to do those things, or you can't feel anything, or you feel completely shut down to it, it's like, I think what you're really encouraging people to do is doing it anyway. And also, I mean, knowing that you will make it through, like, you. And I think what you haven't spoken so much to, and we're actually almost at an hour, we've been talking for a while, you haven't spoken so much to working one-on-one with someone, or working, you know, getting that kind of support. But I think obviously that it sounds like you did.
It's absolutely vital. Yeah, 100%. It's so important. It's so important not just to be able to process the unprocessed things, which, you know, we can, you know, if you're skilled, you can do that with yourself. So like, why would you need to work with someone? Well, for starters, like, if you're in a PTSD state, it's very bloody hard to hold yourself. Like, it's very hard, and you don't need to hold yourself. And being totally self-sufficient is also a trauma response. You know, so it's like, I think it's, and it's also like, that's a part of rewiring the attachment trauma, right? Is like actually showing up and having someone show up for you and be there and listen to you and validate you and care about you, you know, is the attachment piece, to be able to trust other humans, to be able to continue to relate with them. That's our ability to have, well, to grow or heal into secure attachment as best we can, right? And that doesn't happen when we're doing all the work all on our own and just, you know, doing TRE or doing the meditation. It's like that actually happens in relationship with another person, both with like a therapist and with partners and with friends. You know, it's like the healing isn't a solo job. The healing is very much systematic, you know. So, which you know, but I guess you're just asking me to say my view on it. So,
well, yeah, and I'm also, because your story, and I want to ask one other question before we end, but your stories, I mean, I think I'm grateful for you sharing, and it's a very important story because it's not this, it's a challenging story. It's not only challenging what you lived through, but it's challenging that then as an adult, when you chose to, you know, when you saw what was happening and you chose to actually to heal yourself and to take a stand for it, that you were met with that kind of ostracization and, or, you know, not being believed, or I mean, being called narcissistic. So it's, yeah, there's something, I think your story and the ways that you've made it through are really, really important. And obviously I do think I mean, this is the work that I do, and I think it's very important on so many levels to have that outside contact, and also specifically somebody who understands how to work with trauma, in part because there's both like working with the trauma itself through the body and the nervous system, but there's also, and you sort of speak to this, working with the relationship, because whatever patterns that we developed, you know, in this kind of early environment that, you know, wasn't where we were forced to, where there was trauma, or we're forced to, you know, act in certain ways to survive, we develop certain mechanisms that then, I mean, I believe that a lot of that can only be healed in relationship again. And part of that healing is like, you know, if I'm working with somebody, it's like, oh, you didn't like this intervention I just did, or you don't trust me, right? Like, we need to act, in my view, I think I think that we can offer, there's a lot of healing that happens through allowing people to be exactly where they are and having the responses that they are, and then being able to process them. Because in that early environment, they couldn't have that, right? Like in your case, right? You weren't, even as an adult, you weren't believed. So the importance of not only being believed, but having, and you didn't speak to this, this is the part I'm sort of curious about, but you seem to, I don't know if you ever had any doubt, but my experience of working with people who have been in a situation such as yours, where they reveal something as an adult and they're not believed, or they're gaslit in the way that you were, and or people who've had psychologically abusive partners and they're trying to extricate themselves, even when there's even when the people that I've worked with have how do I say this? Even when I would say they're as strong as you and kind of understand the territory and are like, no, this really did happen, I often find people having a lot of doubt, or they're like, did this really happen? Was it really this bad?
Of course.
It's so hard to hold on. Like, what I've seen again and again is and I can feel this in my own family, like my own family trauma that I've been in another kind of layer of recently, of like having a friend literally be like, I've been tracking that every time we talk, I feel this in your system. I can see this. And me literally making up excuse. I'm like, no, but I don't think it was that bad. And then I would tell her something that was bad. And then I would tell her something and I'd be like on board. And then the next day I would forget again. Like literally it would be like, oh no, but I don't know if it's, no, but like, isn't really true in my family.
It's so much, isn't it?
Well, but so
it's obviously like for some part of you, and for some part of people who have memories like this come up, it's like, it's a bit too much. Like, it's a lot. So of course people doubt, because it's to face, and this is why, you know, I had a very interesting thing happen, and I'll just like kind of
Yeah.
wrap it up. But like, to face the cruelty that people who we love inflict upon us, or people who we know and love inflict upon close others, is so difficult to face. We usually don't want to believe it's true, because then the illusion of safety is shattered. Mm-hmm. And especially for people, you know, in families. So I had a very interesting experience in how I dealt with how my family responded to me. Mm-hmm. Because whilst I was in the middle of having flashbacks and dealing with my trauma, someone I knew who had been an acquaintance admitted to me that he molested his own child. Mm. And so I had to then sit with the feelings of like, what the fuck do I do with this? And I didn't want it to be true. Because to believe that is a horrendous thing. And I don't know what's happening with you in your family, so I'm not saying, you know, it's like obviously the same thing, but to what you're talking about people starting to confront this kind of trauma, it's like families don't want it to be true, because if it's true, then what else has that person done? Have they done it to my children? What does that say about me as a person, that I've been close to this person? And if it's not true and I do something about it, am I ruining an innocent person's life? And the same thing for people who've been through this kind of trauma. It's like, you don't want that to be true. That's the last thing you want to be true, because then you have to face the betrayal of someone actually doing that to you. And then you have to go and feel all the powerless places that have been locked and hidden away, you know? Yeah. So, you know, when it first came up for me, you know, for a while I was like, oh God, no, this isn't, please no, you know, but it is very, yes, like that very much definitely happened, you know. So
how, I mean, I'm curious for you regarding like, how were you able to get through that part of it? I mean, because, right, I mean, like, was it with therapist's help? Was it with friends' help? Like, were you very clear about, like, were you able to kind of hold on to like, no, this did happen, this really is that bad? Or did you kind of keep, you know, like, did you have any part of you that was like, oh my God, maybe I am narcissistic? I mean, not, you know, just even in a moment, even though it's obviously the farthest from the truth, yeah, that you can imagine.
I definitely had moments of that, and I think that's a part of the gaslighting trauma, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like part of it is the deep invalidation that people who've been through any kind of childhood trauma. So there's a lot of invalidation that goes on in childhood trauma. So the child is constantly making it their fault rather than the parent's fault, because if it's the parent's fault, then I'm really fucking unsafe. If this big human here who's providing everything for me is not safe, that world is terrifying. So I better be the bad person because I can control me. Yeah. You know? So
yeah.
Yeah. So I think, to answer your question, I don't know how I got through it. I'm really grateful for the past. I tell you, like, it's really given me an ability to sit with the unknown and to just have patience. I think I just knew that I was okay with not fully knowing.
That's beautiful.
And I knew that, like, I would know, and I just needed to wait. I think that's how I was.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, that's a quality that you have. That, I mean, it sounds like you have a lot of different qualities, that the fire in you, even if it was dimmed, the compassion that you have, like, you know, when you go through an experience, to really be like, oh wow, this is what other people experience too. And then being able to sit in the unknown, because I do think that's just what struck me. And maybe this is like a great message for us to end on. But for those of you who, we're talking, your story is about sort of this family ostracization and early and like sexual abuse. There's lots of other forms of early attachment trauma. That's usually what I deal with in my work, that may be more about emotional neglect or emotional abuse, gaslighting, like all the denial, of sort of not validating one's reality, all kinds of different things. But I think what I get from your story, and which is very inspiring to me, is, and what I think the message is for everyone who's dealing with any kind of early trauma, and for many people, they go along not even like you, not even knowing that is, like knowing that, wow, I'm having all these weird symptoms, or I do this when I'm in intimate relationships, and then having kind of a realization of, oh, whoa, this is actually from early attachment trauma or early childhood trauma. One thing I want to say is, what I'm getting from your story is just that there's no straight journey.
No.
And I think that's actually the most important.
And there's no one way, and there's no one way to heal either.
Yeah. I think you've provided a lot of like beautiful ways that you kind of made it through that. And I think very inspiring ways, and very real, like, okay, yeah, I felt completely dark, I still sometimes, I have felt that darkness since I was a little kid, and I still, I've been having periods of that now too. And then it's like finding ever new ways to work with, and so I think that like one of the big messages is that, I mean, one, definitely work with somebody and have different resources, but also that, I would say work with someone who can help you to really uncover and discover the right way for you and the different things you can do. And that even if you're feeling so terrible, it doesn't mean that it's not, that you're not healing. And it doesn't mean that, you're not on the road to recover. I mean, and the thing we didn't speak about, really interesting, right, is we didn't speak so much about the impacts of not dealing with it, but some of those impacts are, obviously the family system stays the same. But also, one might live their life having all kinds of symptoms like depression, anxiety, insomnia, never like going from one relationship. Eating disorders. Yeah. I also have that in my history. I think going like repeating, having, no matter how hard one tries, like ending up in the same kinds of relationships over and over and over again, that, are not supportive, some of the stuff that you said at the beginning, never emotional dysregulation, struggling to regulate your nervous system and your emotions, which affect everything. And, potentially struggling to, have meaningful work or make enough money, or, I mean, all kinds of things. So I think it's also just it's so important to, even if it's so important to actually to look at this and actually be, take different steps towards healing.
Yeah. And I think like to kind of come back to like the topic of this, like, because we're talking about doing lineage breakers. I didn't think we were going to talk about me the whole time, like, but this is kind of just what's happened. But like, I appreciate that your interest in my story. Like, it feels like it feels kind on my heart, like, that you have interest in my story. But to bring back to like the topic of our talk, and also a trauma-informed model, to bring those two things together, it's like, what trauma does is it removes people from who they are. Like, it removes us from our nature. It shatters one's sense of identity. So you don't know who you are. Like, maybe you were constantly controlled by someone, or you had to hide, you couldn't speak up, you know, it's like, and then, you know, because my work is mainly in empowerment and sexuality, you know, and obviously so many people who go to the sexuality world go there because they're fucking traumatized, you know, so like working in a trauma-informed way is super important. But it's like these people have never learned, not these people, it's like many people have never learned how to just be them, and how to speak up and have a voice and live their purpose. Because how do you live your purpose if you don't know who you are? How do you state your boundaries if you don't know who you are? How do you feel your pleasure and your sensuality if you're disassociated from your body? You can't, because trauma removes us and shatters our sense of self. And so finding a practitioner who works in a trauma-informed way, you know, will be someone who helps you find your way rather than imposes a way. And I think that that is, along with compassion, is like breaking the ties of the lineage and like separating from people who, if they aren't willing to heal with you, and hopefully they are, it's like the choice to stay is often like, well, I won't belong. And it's like, honey, you don't belong anyway, because if you have to hide who you are, that's not belonging, you know. So I think that the beautiful thing about stepping out of, whether that's healing the lineage and being with the lineage, or like stepping away from permanently or for a time, is to find deeper compassion within oneself in order to become oneself, you know, and finding the right person to help you do that.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful way. I love, yeah, it's such a beautiful way of saying that. I would also just add that one thing that I think happens, especially when trauma happens, whether it's like repetitive relational trauma or child sexual abuse, or any other form of physical abuse, is that children develop strategies as children. And so we often are, and especially if the wound happens when we're really, really young, the strategy is kind of gets created alongside the sense of self. And so process to untangle that. But I think that's also another reason why you're like, for what you're speaking to, I think when people start to really confront their trauma, and it can be for me, it's been an extremely long process, because
me too.
Because it was so underneath the surface. And you know, it's also seeing that how we're being in the world might be coming more from strategy than who we truly are and who we truly want to be, because that was the only option at the time. And kids do all kinds of creative things. Like, it's a beautiful thing, right? Because it's how we survive. And so it's actually, the strategy is a beautiful strategy. And I always like to give a lot of space for people to, you know, for us to honor that like, this is true. But I think that it speaks to what you're speaking to. It's like, as we keep untangling this, then we get to see, okay, wait, do I actually want to use this strategy? Is it an effective strategy? And yeah, what else, what might actually be more true for me? Yeah, that was just another piece. Yeah. But I love what you just said. I think I mean, it's probably, we've gone over an hour, just is what it is.
It's been fun though.
No, it's been great. That's the point.
I feel like we could keep going. We're both like, yeah, and this bit and that bit, and yeah, I think so too.
I know, it's so true. It's so true.
It's cute.
Yeah. There's so much around. I mean, there's really, this is like the heart of my work, and there's, and I know the heart of your work, and there's so much around this topic. So it is something that we can kind of endlessly talk about. Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing forth your story. I think it makes it so human for people to hear a story, and also a story that doesn't have, I mean, you're doing better, which is the point, but it doesn't have a bow, you know, with your family. It's not like, oh, I worked through this and then my family saw the light because I did all this work. That isn't how it works. And I think what's most important is that we're healing, and also that we have ourselves, that we're actually you're choosing you. I want to say that to, right? That it's that you're choosing you.
Yeah, it is. It's like fighting for your life to choose yourself. That's what it was like for me. But I guess, like, just to a piece that you just spoke to. You like some of my clients, and I do this to myself sometimes, and then I see it like my clients, as they sometimes, I see them do this, some of them, where it's just like, oh, I should be further along than this, and there's something wrong with me, and it's just like, nah. I think that this is a lifetime job, like this, learning to love oneself, and the symptoms might get easier. Well, they will, if you're doing good work, then they will definitely get easier, for sure, 100%. But there's no timeline, and there's no, like, that need to be good and to be successful can also be a trauma response, and that everyone's just doing it in their own time.
Yeah. And how can we do it in the most kind way? And I mean, part of the work that I do is I'm always wanting to support people, because this was my journey, to not be endless self-improvement projects or endless healing projects. So it's also like, I always am still working with somebody, but I'm often working with someone who's helping me to be able to, this is more my psychology, but to live now, that I don't, it's like, okay, this can all still be going on, and I can have compassion for it. And I can be like, I see you, I'm with you. And like, what am I going to do today? And what
not the focus of your life.
Yeah.
It's like, you want to go dancing.
Yeah.
Like, this time is for the trauma thing, but then I have a whole life to live.
Yeah. And I think there's different stages of healing. Like, I think when someone's first, like, when someone's first healing, they're first confronting it, then there's often, right, like, a lot of that stuff is in the way from having the kind of pleasure that you want. Or there's a, sounds like your experience was like, you were working on your trauma, what you knew, and all the symptoms and the mental health stuff that you had. And then there was this, like you said, you felt there was almost like you were resourced enough to have experience come up. And then that was the experience for a while. And, and then now you're in a different place right now. So I think we're constantly healing, and we're also exactly.
I'm so glad. I'm like, thank God.
Yeah, I'm really happy for you. That's great.
Yeah, but I agree. Like, I guess maybe the better thing to have said would have been, it's a lifetime job having an attitude of compassion to oneself, as opposed to needing to fix oneself. That might have been better.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you said is great. It's just like, can healing not be something that, can it just be part of life, right? It's just like, it's an inherent, we're always growing. We're always, moving forward. And so, but I do love that. Yeah. It's about, anyway, we could keep talking about this. Maybe we will again.
Yeah.
Sure that
I've loved being here. So maybe another time, if you feel like it.
I'm glad. It's been really lovely to have you, and just to have such a kind of, also, we're basically just having a chat in our living rooms online.
Yeah, well, literally. But also, I just want to acknowledge that I think the quality of the conversation happens in large part due to the quality of the questions that are asked, and the quality of the person, the quality of the, this is going to sound so like spiritual, but like, here I go with it, I'm just going to let it rip. Like, the quality of the consciousness that can receive it, and like, which sounds really arrogant on my part in a way, in a kind of twisted way. I don't mean it that way. What I'm trying to say is just thanks for being great, and like, for like having a really great conversation, and for asking me to be here, and for having me here. And it's been fun.
Yeah, it's been great. I really respect and admire you and your presence
Thank you.
on this online space. Yeah, and the fire in you that's willing to speak about all of these things. It's so important. I mean, I just think that kind of transparency, people need to hear real life. They need to hear, like, right, like, this is real messy life, and we do what we can, and we take the steps to move forward. I don't know. That's what I'm most interested in, is how do we be human in the best way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yay.
Awesome.
Well, so I would love, I know your course starts tomorrow.
It
Um,
does.
speak
Pleasure
a
after
little-
trauma.
yeah. Do you want to speak a little bit about your course?
Sure.
And sure.
Um, so enrollments of, I mean, unless someone wants to go enroll right now, the enrollments will be closing after I get off this call with you and go and close them on my website. So pleasure after trauma is, I didn't really talk at all, like my background is in coaching and in the personal development world and in the sexuality world. And I just got fed up with people, especially in the sexuality world, re-traumatizing people and and also like really misusing their position of power, and you know, and also that work often really given and offered with good intentions, sometimes without people having the intention to, it re-traumatizing people because it isn't offered in a trauma informed way. And so this whole course has been built specifically for people, not just people who are like, oh, I just live my life and I just want to have a better sex life. It's like, that's kind of how a lot of the sexuality courses are offered. But the thing is that a lot of people who go to the sexuality courses have trauma. And so I built a course for those people, you know, so that it's created with a structure, the whole structure of it from beginning to end. Everything is structured to be trauma informed, so that people can feel safe and so they can build up to having self-connection and self-pleasure in a way that's not, like you spoke earlier on about, you know, growing up in environments where the caregivers were people who were the unsafe ones. And so then later on you might be attracted to people who are unsafe. And you know, I have another course that's called From Fear Response to Freedom, which is all about the fawning fear response, which is essentially that piece. But you know, what can happen a lot of the time is that people mistake danger for erotic arousal, and then it becomes entwined in their system, or they're completely numb. And so the whole course has been set up for them to address the pieces that come before having these massive wild orgasmic experiences, which hopefully they will have. But it's like, if we can, instead of just putting you into a space and giving you massive wild orgasmic experiences that actually reinforce that structure in your nervous system of fear, arousal through fear, because it's like, if you don't rewire the way in which the system is aroused, I'm kind of saying this in the wrong way, but if you keep reinforcing the way in which someone is aroused with opening more energy and more sexual power, then it gets embedded more deeply. And so people might go to heal their sexual trauma and become more orgasmic, but then they find that they have better orgasms with bigger assholes. Like, I mean people who aren't nice people is what I mean. If you like anal play, go for it. It's fun. But like, you know, so this course has been like created to be trauma informed and to help people create safety within themselves, create healthy boundaries, and do all the foundation work that is required. Because if you aren't feeling pleasure, it's happening for a reason, and there's an underlying issue. And if we can address the underlying issue, then instead of you opening and having all the side effects, then hopefully you can open and have safety within the nervous system. So instead of it being that high drama that we were kind of talking about earlier, like a nervous system that's activated and used to sympathetic arousal, instead of it being constantly that state, it can be like a non-dramatic, very content, pleasurable, beneficial for life experience. So this course, Pleasure After Trauma, it starts tomorrow. If you want to book in, then you'll need to go and do it within the next 10 minutes before I go and close it. But also I will be running it again in February. So, and I do one-on-one. So if people who are wanting specifically, because it's specifically focused on getting to the underlying issues to create inner safety so that pleasure, power, and openness can happen. You know, these are the things that are often very affected by trauma. So that's the course. You guys can find me at fiercemystic.com, and my Instagram is at Freya Vajra. And I think my public page is Fierce Mystic as well on Facebook. So yeah.
Great. Amazing. And it sounds like the one-on-one work that you do is also really supporting people to like doing similar to what the course is, or do you also offer other kinds of work?
Yeah, I mean, the main reason why people come is because they're like, I want to feel more pleasure in my body. I want to be able to speak up. I want to have better boundaries. I want to feel more empowered. And I think they're all the same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, so it's like, so people might come with varying different issues and they come to me, you know, for those things, but we just address it in an aware way so that the underlying issues can resolve themselves, and then those things naturally happen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, you know, being able to like you're able to assess kind of like, okay, this person responds this way, like let's say this is how their sexuality plays out, and be able to say like, okay, is this actually coming from an authentic response, or is it coming from this kind of strategy or this kind of past defensive thing? I mean, you could say that about fawning as well, right? Like someone might fawn a certain way in life, and again, it's the fawning response is like, that's a response, for example, that people aren't often aware of doing. So then you're bringing awareness to that response. It's like, okay, well, where is this coming from? Is this really how you want to be engaging and relating in your relationships? That's what you're bringing people around. Yeah.
Yeah. In relationships and with oneself, just
yeah.
being able to have that experience.
Beautiful.
Because it's so life-giving.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I guess I'll just say, I mean, I can just tell people that I do this show every week on my personal page. My Instagram is psychospiritual.mentor. And I offer mentorship programs for women where I'm providing the somatic, spiritual, and therapeutic tools. Like I said at the beginning, to resolve, I do a lot with trauma and have my own way of working with trauma in the body and the nervous system and through the relationship, but all for the purpose of, you know, experiencing more enjoyment in life, but also being able to create. The program's kind of a combination between therapy and coaching, I would say. And it's in my view, it's sort of, that's my interest. Like therapy can be a little bit too far on the end of like, we're an endless process, and coaching can be a little bit too far on the end of like, this is what I'm trying to get. And so finding that place of like, let's have a goal. Like people come to me and they have a goal of something that they like, we hold the intention and then we do the deeper work so that it allows.
That's very similar to how I work.
Yeah, we're similar. Yeah.
I feel like we're aligned.
You feel like we're what?
I feel like we're aligned.
Aligned.
Aligned. It's a bit of Stacey coming out there.
Yes. Yeah, a different way of saying it. Yes.
Yes, so my people, go follow Laurie. Go follow her on Insta.
Yeah, and you can follow Freya. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly why I've really resonated with you. We do have a lot of different alignments. I'm also pretty authentic and direct about things.
You're an East Coaster, aren't you?
No, but people always think no.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. Yeah.
No, I'm from the West Coast, but I have that personality. And I think you're very similar to me. And one of the things that I'm interested in, and I think you do in your work too, is I make a lot of space, like we're with your experience in a very compassionate way, but I'm also like, I'm very interested in like, let's be direct about what's going on so you don't have to live with this forever. Like I'm not one, like, you know, so, and I sense that you're that way too. It's like, okay, this is what's going on. How can we address it? You know, let's do this.
You got to get to the stuff.
Yeah.
Life is short.
Yeah, that's true.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everyone.
Bye,
Yeah.
everyone.
Bye.